Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to yet another edition of the Democratic Vote. My name is Phyllis Italiano, and I am the hostess. And with me today, I have a gal who I meet sometimes walking on the road. I'm coming out of the water, and she's walking around Maidstone Park. That's how we met.
That's right.
The last couple of times. Her name is Francesca Rheannon, and I am always so jealous of that first name. It's such a beautiful first name, Francesca. And Francesca is going to talk about the things that she is interested in that she feels are very important for our planet. And that's really, isn't that what we should all be interested in?
It's our home. It's our only home.
And not only that, it's got to survive.
Yeah.
And beat this thing called climate change.
Right.
Okay, Francesca, we know that you were born here in the United States and was raised in different places, New Jersey actually, I guess.
It's one of them, yes.
Yeah, and then went to school. Where did you go to college?
So, first of all, thanks for having me back on the show, Phyllis. It's a pleasure to be here. So I went to the University of Wisconsin at Madison. Actually, I went to Bard College for my first 2 years. I transferred to Madison.
Oh, Bard in New York State?
I did.
Yeah, my daughter went there.
Oh, it was a great school, actually. But because I was so involved at the time in the anti-war movement, I decided to transfer to Madison, as I spoke about a bit last time. And then, I came back years later. I went to the University of Massachusetts because I lived in Amherst, Massachusetts. And I studied counseling psychology. I got a master's in education and really enjoyed being a therapist so much. I decided to become a clinical social worker. So I got a master's in social work at the University of at UConn in Hartford, Connecticut. And I did that for about 10 years. And actually, that's what taught me how to become a journalist and do interviewing, because I worked as I said, as a clinical social worker, actually as an emergency services social worker, when I'd be called to the hospital and would have to evaluate people very quickly and kind of ask them questions that would get to the heart of the matter, and then decide if they were okay to go home, what kind of services did they need to be hospitalized if they were a danger to themselves or others. And
wow, that was quite a responsibility.
It was, and I have to say I really enjoyed working with the clients. But at the same, just as I got into the mental health field began to really change. And social work went from being the kind of job where you worked, in a public agency, and it was nonprofit because it was government. It became privatized, almost entirely privatized. So just in those 10 years, it really went from being the kind of profession where, the client was number one and their interests were number one, which is, of course, the way it needs to be, to where it was really the profits of the private agency that took over all the kind of mental health counseling in Massachusetts at that time. It was their profits that were number one.
Wow.
And so I really decided at a certain point that I no longer could be part of that system, because I wasn't really allowed to treat people in the way that they needed to be treated. We were very limited in the number of times that, people would get 6 authorized visits with a therapist. And I was working with people who were, first of all, were poor and had all the stresses of poverty. And second of all, were involved in very chaotic situations where there was drug addiction, domestic violence. I was a family therapist.
Wow.
You can't fix people in 6 sessions, and then maybe you can reauthorize for another 6. I mean, it takes at least that time to begin to build trust with somebody. And the only way that you can really change people is to, you know, my point of view, which really came out of the kind of politics I've always had, was to empower people to heal themselves. And in order to do that, you have to build trust. You have to be the kind of person where they feel that they can actually, you can model to them what it means to trust yourself enough to change yourself. And that became very difficult, but an interesting project came out of that. As I said, I was living in Massachusetts at the time, and I had a garden, and I was working with families in Holyoke. This was in the early 90s, before, when the AIDS epidemic was absolutely raging through, especially through
certainly was
Holyoke, Massachusetts. It was driven by IV drug use, and many of the families that I was working with had parents who were in fact dying of AIDS, and I was working with kids, or they had, you know, as I said, one of the family members may have been involved with drugs, there may have been violence. And I had a client who was a 13-year-old girl, very talented poet, a young girl who was often suicidal. That's why I had become involved with her, because she would threaten suicide. I'd be called, she would be hospitalized for maybe 3 days and then sent home. I mean, there was very little actual care that went on. And I was thinking a lot about her, because on the one hand she was so talented, and on the other hand was so desperate about her life. And I was working in my garden one day and feeling, you know how it is when you're working in your garden. You just feel connected with the earth, and you feel like anything is possible, and you're taking care of something, and you know that it can grow. And I was contrasting that with the frustration that I felt at the prospects of this young woman. You know, what was ahead of her? Would she be able to thrive and find a way to thrive? And I thought to myself, you know, there should be like an urban gardening project in Holyoke. What would help these families, who after all were poor, and who felt so beset by the difficulties that they were facing, that they needed something where they could grow their own sustenance, both physically and metaphorically. And all of a sudden, I just had the whole idea came to me in a flash. I thought, I want to start an urban gardening project. It's going to be called Nuestras Raíces, which means our roots in Spanish. It's going to be in the Latino community.
What does it mean in Spanish?
Our roots.
Oh.
Our roots. Nuestras Raíces. And it would have a greenhouse, and it would have a canning facility, and it would have community gardens, and it would have gardens in the schools. And you know, it was like one of those just flashes of inspiration. So for 2 years, I just talked about it with everybody I met. And finally, I met a Latino, the first Latino councilman in Holyoke, a man named Diosdado Lopez. I love his first name because it means God-given, Diosdado.
Really?
Yeah, it's just beautiful.
That is a nice name.
And he was thrilled with the idea, and he said, you know, there is a community garden here that was started by a Hampshire College student. And when he graduated, it kind of, you know,
went the way of all flesh.
It went the way of all flesh. He said, but I know the people who are in it. He said, why don't you start with that? And we did. I got a group of people together, and I connected with them. And over a couple of years, I always said that when I was on the board of directors, I created a board of directors, and I was on it. And I always said that when the majority of people on the board of directors were from the Latino community itself, I would leave, because the whole point was empowerment. Yes. It wasn't for me to be some kind of white savior from the suburbs. You know, it was for people to create their own way of being. Now, that project is still around. I mean, that was started in 1992. It's still around.
Really?
Vistas Raíces is all that I saw in the beginning happened. They have a women's project. They have a youth project. They've got projects in all the schools.
Really?
They have a bakery. They have a, I mean, it's not because of me. I was just the spark.
Right.
But the people really made it into a wonderful, wonderful project, and it's still going on. It's internationally known. So things are possible. I mean, that was possibly the first thing I did. Well, I was always interested in health and in the environment, but I think that was what really first got me. As with anybody, if you're a gardener, you're attuned to the planet.
Yes.
You're attuned to the plants.
Yes.
You can see what's going on, as climate change has made it more risky. We have droughts, we have floods. And I think that was really, really the beginning for me. After that, basically, I got involved. I'm going to skip ahead. I got involved in radio, in a radio project at the University of Massachusetts. And
you were living up there now?
I was still living up in Western Massachusetts. I lived there for 25 years. And I have a radio show now that I've had for 18 years called Writer's Voice. It's a book show and a podcast. But I also started another radio show, which is still going on, but I no longer do it. And it was called, now I am blanking on the name of my Sea Change Radio. And it was about the intersection of corporate responsibility, business, and the environment. And it's a great show. It's
Wow.
It's done out of California now. The host is Alex Wise, and he's been doing it for, many years, since 2009 actually. Or 2010. I just started it with somebody else and did it for a year. But that's what really educated me about what's going on with the climate. So fast forward to now, I am the co-chair of the Climate Reality Project, Long Island chapter. Climate Reality Project, for your audience who knows Al Gore, he started it with his movie, The Inconvenient Truth.
Yes.
An Inconvenient Truth, his slideshow. And the organization is really built to educate people about the climate crisis. And we have a very strong coalition of chapters in New York State, probably one of the strongest in the country. We don't just do education, we're very engaged in advocacy for things like, for example, we are working to help pass the Environmental Bond Act, which is on the ballot November 8th, and if you do early voting, yes. This is absolutely critical because this would actually give the money to be able to hire the people to be able to make the changes that we need to make in New York State. New York State passed a very forward-looking climate law. We have mandated targets to have, for example, decrease our emissions by 50% by 2030 and by 85% by 2050, but we don't have enough people. We don't have enough people to man the jobs that are going looking for this change to happen.
Really?
And we need that Environmental Bond Act, which would not raise taxes. It basically comes out of the budget as it is. And when you go to vote, you have to flip over the ballot, and you'll see it's Proposition 1. And there's another Proposition 2, by the way, that's Proposition 3. That's the community housing proposition, which is also very important for sustainability, that we have sustainable communities, people can afford to live here. They're both very important, but it's really important that people vote for the Environmental Bond Act so that we have
and
the
that's
money
on
to
Proposition
do it.
1.
That's Proposition 1. And right now, the climate law, New York's climate law passed in 2019. Pretty much nothing happened in 2020 because of the pandemic. 2021, they began working on the plan to make, to implement the climate law. New York set up what was called the Climate Action Council, and by the end of this year, December 31st, they have to come out with a finalized roadmap of how we are going to achieve the changes that we need. And you know, I'm really thrilled. I have to say, it is absolutely critical that the Democrats return to Congress, because Republicans are threatening to get rid of the Inflation Reduction Act. The Inflation Reduction Act, along with New York's climate law, is going to make it so much easier for people to do what I've done at my house, and slash their costs and have a much safer.
What have you done with your house?
So in my house, I live in, you know, my house was built in 1967 as a summer house.
Mine too.
Yeah. Well, what I was able to do, and people can go forward, is with a 30% tax credit. I put solar panels on my roof.
Yeah.
I put on a new roof, which also I got 30% off for that. I put in a heat pump, which gives me heating and cooling, and slashed my heating costs. It's energy sipping and very, very comfortable heat. I changed, I almost entirely electrified my home, and this is a very, very important thing that we have to do. You know, the gas industry in New York is trying to scare people and tell them it's going to cost them all this money to do this. But the Inflation Reduction Act and the New York state incentives are going to make it much easier. And you know what my electric bill is every month? It's between $14 and $16 a month.
Wow. Well, you have solar panels on it.
I have solar panels, but off that, I run my electric vehicle. I have a Nissan Leaf. So I don't pay, I mean, my fuel costs, I don't have fuel costs. I charge at home. I run all my electric appliances, my heat pump, my hybrid water heater heat pump, my electric stove, I mean, I just run it all, and it's $14 to $16 a month.
Well, you have to tell us how you do this, because this is what people need to do.
It's the solar panels. I tell you, if you put solar panels on your roof, the incentives are fantastic. If you're low income, you can get up to 100% of the cost. I mean, up to $14,000. Yeah, I'm not sure how it's going to go, but you'll get a lot. If you're low income, you can get up to 100% of the cost of doing some of these, you know, retrofits, solar panels, heat pumps. If you're median income, you can get up to 50%. These are upfront rebates. If you're higher income, you get a 30% tax credit. And that's just the federal incentives. The state incentives also are tremendous. I mean, I bought my EV, you know, I got $2,000 from New York State. I got $9,500 back from the federal tax credit. I mean, that took, $7,000. So I bought my Nissan Leaf for almost $10,000 less than the sticker price.
Francesca, you've got to lead classes on this kind of thing, because this is what people need to do.
I mean, it is and cheaper to maintain. My EV, it's nothing. The only maintenance on my EV is brakes, and I change the filter every year in the cabin, in the air filter cabin.
When you say your EG, what?
My EV, my electric vehicle.
Your electric vehicle.
My Nissan Leaf. So it's maintenance free. The battery is estimated to last 15 years. I'm not going to even have the car that long. And then at the end of its useful life, it may be able to be turned into a battery that I can use to power my house. So, I mean, this is really the way to go. It is not more expensive.
Well, you know, you need to really and truly start to have some kind of classes for people to teach them how to do these things, because this is the way.
You can go to East Hampton, the Energize East Hampton website. That's East Hampton Town's website, Energize East Hampton. Go there, and I will say, kind of get your ducks in a row, but it's after January 1st that the federal incentives are going to kick in, and that is if we keep the House and the Senate, because the Republicans are threatening to take away the Inflation Reduction Act. So, you know, it is really, really important that we keep those, because we're running out of time to do the transition that is cheaper, safer, better, and better for the planet.
Well, I really think that you have to start doing classes like this for people to teach them how to do these things.
Well, I think you got a good point there, Phyllis. You know, what we will do as a Climate Reality Project Long Island is I will let you know when we're going to we will start having meetings. I mean, I've been very involved in kind of legislative advocacy, but I'm planning on having a meeting and having this organization called New Yorkers for Clean Power to do a seminar on how you can take advantage of these incentives.
That's what we need.
Exactly.
We need that kind of leadership to show us what to do, because I had solar panels on my roof and they leaked. And I had to have them taken off, and I had to put a new roof on.
Oh my God. How long ago did you have them put on?
I think it was 2012.
Wow, that should not have been.
And I had to take them off because they leaked.
Wow.
And I was getting...
So they were not installed properly.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I'm not using that company anymore.
Yeah.
But I mean, I ruined a rug. I ruined my bedroom. My whole bedroom had to be redone, you know, because the walls got wet and stuff. You know, it was really quite a catastrophe.
Yeah, you know, that's why I put on a new roof, actually.
Oh, I did put on a new roof since then.
The company that installed my panel said, well, my roof was ready to be redone anyway, but they said, you really need to put on a new roof. And I took advantage of the 30% tax credit, and I had my roof super insulated, and what a difference that has made. I mean, you know, that alone, because it's not just about producing clean energy, it's about using less energy.
Yes.
And it made a huge difference when I was able to.
I'm serious. I think you should do a local class at the library about how to work through this kind of era that we are living in, to people taking the advantage of making sure that they do the best thing they can for their own house and the planet.
Right.
I mean, that's the key.
It is.
I have 15 solar panels in my backyard piled up that are not on my roof yet.
Wow.
I had to put a new roof on. I had to redo my whole bedroom.
I wonder if you can put them on a frame. Is that possible?
I don't know. That's what I would have to find out.
Yeah.
How do I find that out? Not by my end, not by my knowledge.
Well, I can actually. There are definitely resources for this, and that's when this organization, New Yorkers for Clean Power, offer a 45-minute free personal consultation to tell you exactly who you need to go to in order to lay out a plan for doing clean energy, for retrofitting your home with energy efficiency methods. So there are tremendous resources, and if people just Google New Yorkers for Clean Power, you'll see on the website where you can schedule a personal consultation.
So it's called New
Yorkers for Clean Power.
New Yorkers for Clean Power. You got that, folks?
Yeah,
New Yorkers for Clean Power. Well, I'm going to look into this because this is very important to me. I really want to make sure that, I mean, I remember when I did have solar panels where I had electric bills of $14 and things like that. And now it's 300 and something.
Wow.
Well, you know,
exactly.
you have an electric stove, you have an electric this and electric that, and before you know it, it all adds up.
It does.
And PSEG sits on the top of a pile of money, mine.
Yeah, and PSEG actually has some pretty good incentives, I have to say. But then that's another campaign. Maybe I'll come back and talk about it. There's a campaign to make LIPA a public power company. Get rid of PSEG, LI, and have it be accountable to the public. have it be a public company.
Well, that's what it used to be.
That's what it used to be, and
Yes.
and Fred Thiel, and he's another guy who's important to reelect. Fred Thiel got a legislation passed last year for a revisioning of LIPA as a public power company, and now that's what's happening. Over the next 2 years, there's a whole planning commission in how to do that, so that we'll have more power over our energy, we'll be able to access more clean energy, we'll have better incentives and cheaper bills.
You know what? You have to go to the library and establish a class in this thing to help people to do these kinds of
At
things.
least I can do, I'll start with a webinar, and I'll let
Yeah,
you
but
know.
a webinar is hard because not everybody can maneuver that. What you really need is a voice where people can listen to you and you can guide them. Thank you for
Alright.
coming. My goodness, I
Thank
didn't
you.
realize you were going to change my life. I thought I was going to change your life.
Well, I know you've got a Prius, so I know you're conscious of
Oh,
this.
I am very conscious of it. Listen, I know that at some point, I have to face 2 granddaughters, and they're going to say, well, Grandma, what'd you do?
Yeah, exactly.
What'd you do to help the planet? And I have to be able to say something more than I do shows.
Yeah.
You know, I have to do. I mean, I have had energy audits and things like that, but I want more.
Yeah.
I want what you do.
It's great. I love it.
Yes. Well, you got to lead us.
It's
Put
all
up
out
that
there.
flag and lead the people in Suffolk County.
Well, thank you, Phyllis. I'm not alone in this. There are many others like myself, and anyone who's interested, just look up Climate Reality or get in touch with me at Climate Reality, Long Island.
You
I'll
got
clue
it,
you in.
honey. You have no idea how you're going to get Climate Reality. Got that, folks? Climate Reality, Long Island. That's what we got to do. We have to do it.
Yes.
I mean, it's a matter of the planet. You know, if the
Yeah.
United States doesn't do it, can we expect
Anyone else?
Panama to do it?
Absolutely.
Well, Panama will be gone anyway. The water will overtake them. Anyway, thank you so much for coming. I've
Thanks
really,
again.
really appreciated it. You certainly have a lot of knowledge.
Well, thank you so much, Phyllis. It's been a great opportunity to be here.
Yes. Okay. We're